Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for coming. It's all lovely to see you. For those of you who don't have the absolute pleasure of being in my seminar group, I'm Andy, the world's best lecturer. Thank you very much. Hold your applause later. No, but I'm an artist and I'm a PhD researcher here at the university, where I'm looking at the end of the world and druid spiritualities, but also somehow fascism and nationalism have worked their way in. So I'm hopefully the best person to deliver this lecture. Very on purpose, it's a different style of lecture to the ones that Ian gives, in that it's predominantly a written paper that I'll be reading out, hopefully keeping it interesting with my lovely voice. This is because one of the key things that I noticed in the essays last year was one of the things students had trouble with were lead-ins, which is where you sort of introduce an author and their book before you talk about the quote that you're pulling from them. So this is an opportunity for you to hear lots of different versions of how you can read it. Some of them are good, some of them are bad. I'm going to say that they're on purpose. That way it covers a multitude of sins. So a couple of things. So I'm filming this at the front for you all. The camera is on me, not on you. I have dyslexia, so although I know this piece of writing pretty well by now, I might stumble and do some verbal faux pas, so please do bear with me whilst I do that. What else is there? There's a video coming up that has a small bit of, not strobe lighting, but sort of flashing lights. So does anyone have photosensitive epilepsy in the room? Fabulous. Then no warning is needed. Is there anything else I need to cover before we start? No, I think we're all good. So we can start off by singing a hymn. So if you'd like all to get your hymn sheets out, that would be lovely. So I'm assuming you've all been practicing for this, so that would be very handy. So ready yourselves, and let us begin.
Ben just sent an email.
Oh
did those feat in ancient times, written in 1804 as a preface to his work, Milton, a poem in 2 books, has, like most poems, been given multiple interpretations by its readers. One such interpretation is that of the Holy Legend, a title coined by the Reverend H.A. Lewis in his work Christ in Cornwall, that tells the tale of Joseph of Arimathea, a tin merchant and later saint, who journeyed to England accompanied by Christ during the 17 unrecorded years after his 12th birthday. According to the legend, the pair landed in what is now Birmingham upon Sea, and journeyed to Cornwall via Glastonbury Tor, where, at Cornwall, Joseph wished to impart the knowledge of Cornish tin miners on the Son of God. The authenticity of the Holy Legend is challenged by Professor Charles Thomas of the Institute of Cornish Studies, who suggests that the tradition of our Lord's visit is A, not demonstrably older than the last century, and B, has never been evidenced other than in an oral tradition of the most tenuous kind. Here we have an unreliable origin story that places a deep significance in the geography of a specific locality, in this case, England's green and pleasant land, that, the legend suggests, holds a position of such importance within the world stage that Joseph of Arimathea thought that the boy Christ should be brought here to learn from English, and more specifically, Cornish tin miners. Mythologies such as these are an integral part of building a national identity, as suggested by Ernst Renan in his 1882 lecture, What is a Nation? If you're going to look at nationalism, I really recommend What is a Nation, Ernst Renan from 1882. The nation, like the individual, is the culmination of a long past of endeavours, sacrifice and devotion. Of all cults, that of the ancestor is the most legitimate, for the ancestors have made us what we are. Heroic past, great men, also women, glory. This is the social capital upon which one bases a national idea. To have common glories in the past, and to have a common will in the present, to have performed great deeds together, to wish to perform still more. These are the essential conditions for being a people. These mythologies come in 2 sorts. The first are those fictions that the populace refute as literal truth, but which espouse a sense of national identity, as is the case with the aforementioned Holy Legend, but also that of King Arthur, the Knights of the Round Table, and in more modern times, James Bond. The second of these sorts of mythologies are those exaggerated tales that omit historical details, such as Britain's industrial primacy without an acknowledgement of the horrors of the slave trade, or the fortitude of Winston Churchill during the Second World War without an understanding of his role in the death of between 0.8 and 3.8 million Bengali citizens during the Bengal famine. As Arash Ibnzadeh suggests, the national memory must be a willfully selective memory. This mythical element in its shared memories is what enables the nation's common history to provide it with a motivating power. So much so that the academic study of history poses a threat to the capacity of the nation to hold together. Nationalism does not evolve out of these myths, but rather has them retroactively implanted into itself, as is the example of Edward Williams, known to most by his Druid name, Iolo Morganwg. Morganwg was Welsh, at a time when Welsh national identity had been subsumed by the British after it became part of the Kingdom of Great Britain in 1707. Morganwg was a keen Welsh nationalist and joined several Welsh societies in London that promoted Welsh culture to the diaspora. Diaspora, for those of you who don't know, is a word that means people who have come from a place and settled elsewhere. So, for example, the African diaspora is people who are from Africa and have emigrated, migrated, or been born to migrants and live elsewhere. As a member of the Gwyneddigion, a Welsh society whose focus was in the revival of Welsh culture and history, Morganwg found and became interested in Druidry as a historical and potential mythological practice, and sought to use it to promote Welsh nationalism by claiming Druid indigeneity for Wales. If you're interested in Druid indigeneity, lots and lots of pre-nations tried to use Druidry, which really only existed in the writings of Julius Caesar at that point, to say that they existed in their country: Germany, France, Spain, Britain, Wales, Scotland, all claimed that Druidry originated there to give them a sense of sort of historic legitimacy. Through the society, he made a number of contacts that enabled Morgannwg to release a book in 1789 of hitherto unknown works by the medieval Welsh poet Dafydd ap Gwilym. The resulting book, Barddoniaeth Dafydd ap Gwilym, Barddoniaeth is Welsh for poetry, but also the word bard is also etymologically from the same origin source. And bard is the first level of the 3 levels of Druid study, the first being bard, then ove, followed by Druidry. I've lost where I am. There we are. The book was a complete fabrication by Morgannwg, but his forgery went unnoticed by many, and it solidified his name as one of the foremost historians in the revival of Druidry. He continued by inventing a theological groundwork for Druidry of the past, including the Vinol Chafen, the mystical sign of Druidry. Morgannwg also invented the names of the 4 cardinal points of the sun: Alban Arthen, midwinter; Alban Yuca, spring equinox; Alban Herfen, midsummer; and Alban Erfed, autumn equinox. Most importantly, his fabrications were rooted in Wales as the crucible of Druidry. Not everyone had fallen for Morgannwg's forgeries. His contemporary John Walters, in a letter to his friend Edward Davies, described the forger's work, and this is one of my favourite quotes in the entirety of my PhD research: "A made dish cooked up from obscure scraps of ancient bards and the Kabbalah, the pretend arcana, of the modern ones, a superficial acquaintance with the metempsychosis, and these ingredients spiced up with an inordinate quantity of wild invention. It is a species of Freemasonry." Which for an Ed Fringe review would be pretty spicy, so I like that one. In his youth, Morgannwg was deeply unwell, inheriting his mother's asthma, which he treated with doses of laudanum, a solution of opium dissolved in alcohol. The effect of the medication, according to historian Geraint Jenkins, made Morgannwg, again another great quote, prone to losing the boundary between fact and fiction. Incredible. This is academic speak, he was a bullshit merchant. To bring it back to a more broader context, Hobsbawm suggests that no serious historian of nations and nationalism can be a committed political nationalist. Nationalism requires too much belief in what is patentedly not so. These myths, as we shall see later, can become weaponized, appropriated for whatever nationalistic agenda is on the menu. Is everyone following me so far? Any questions at this juncture before we move on? In the case of Blake's and Dibdale's feat in ancient times, we see it become part of the national character beginning in 1916. During the First World War, morale and public support for the war was failing. In response, the British poet laureate Robert Bridges edited and published a patriotic anthology of poems called The Spirit of Man, that sought to revitalise the British public spirits in the wake of war. Blake's poem, on the spiritual significance of England's place in the world, a bastion of British idealism, was included. In the same year, the composer Sir Hubert Parry set Blake's poem to music to create the hymn Jerusalem, which, for those of you who turned up slightly late, you missed a stunning rendition by everyone of Jerusalem, so I might have to repeat it at the end, just so you're not left out. Parry's hymn was created for the Fight the Right movement, which, like Bridges' The Spirit of Man, aimed to sustain the British resolve during the war. A year later, Parry conducted the work at the Albert Hall with an all-female choir for an event promoting national service for women. This, in the eyes of the public, aligned the hymn with the women's suffrage movement, and as a result, in 1924, it was adopted by the Women's Institute as their anthem. As it rose in popularity, it was taken up by a number of disparate, sometimes opposing organisations. It was sung as part of the General Strike of 1926 and recorded by the American singer and left-wing activist Paul Robeson in 1941. The building of a new Jerusalem was taken up as a campaign slogan by the Labour Party in 1945 under Clement Attlee, and the song had entered the Labour Party songbook by the 1950s. It was sung at party conferences of the Conservative Party, the Liberal Democrat Party, the British Liberal Assembly Glee Club, as well as at every graduation at the University of Chichester in living memory. Ian? Fantastic. Through Parry's hymn and Blake's poem, we can see the potential for nationalism to be constructed upon mythology. magnified through circumstance, and then appropriated by opposing organisations to establish a sense of national identity that can be moulded for both right and left-wing politics, as well as beyond. The origin myths of a nation stand in opposition to historical fact. Yet the power of nationalism, of nationhood on the subject, the citizen, is such that to confront the Orwellian opposition can strike at the core of one's being. That is unnecessary. Wake up. At the core of one's being, of one's individual identity. It is the potential for discomfort in your own identities that I will now address before moving on. Although there is not anything inherently wrong with nationalism, particularly in its origins within Romantic nationalism, its later interpretations with the advent of eugenics led to the development of ethnic nationalism, a virulent form of nationalism that is still playing out in the world stage. These events are highly charged, and there are differing views of how these events occur, unfold, and perform themselves. Many of you will hold viewpoints on a variety of these subjects, but I think it is important that we talk about them as researchers, citing our sources along the way. As a result, this lecture will be referring to the atrocities of the Holocaust, the Make America Great Again movement, the Brexit referendum, as well as the events unfolding in Palestine and Israel. As there is a vast amount of reactionary rhetoric around the latter subject, mostly taking place in the social media sphere, I want to spell out exactly how this lecture will be discussing them. I am very suspicious of the things that we are told that we cannot talk about. I know fundamentally that we can talk about anything if it is conducted on the basis of academic inquiry, as long as that inquiry is mediated, supported by evidence, and from a position of good faith, meaning that you're not doing it as an attempt to shit stir. If these are upheld, then the academic pursuit of knowledge is free and without harm. It is under this approach that I conduct all my research, and today's lecture is no different. This is of particular importance given that at least 2 members of the cast of Scream 7 have lost their jobs as a result of talking and supporting one side of the conflict. I will not be giving my personal opinions on the conflict, because that is not the purpose of this lecture. That's the word I was looking for. But I do have them, obviously, so I'm not declaring them because I don't have them. I do. Now, to move on, we must turn back. And in 1882, when Nietzsche declared that God is dead, he meant that the belief in a Christian God has become unbelievable, and that everything built on this faith, leaned on it, had grown into it, for example, our entire European morality, would collapse. The death of God was slow, beginning with the Enlightenment, and as God died, the nation rose in its place. Rather than doing the work of God, you were doing the work of the nation. This civil religion, a term coined by Jean-Jacques Rousseau as the title of Chapter 8, Book 4 of the Social Contract, is exactly the beginnings of the replacement of God by the nation. He states, "Man had at first no kings except the gods, and no government but a theocracy. They reasoned like Caligula, and at the time they reasoned rightly. A long period is needed to change men's sentiments and ideas, in order that they may resolve to take a fellow man as a master, and flatter themselves that all will be well." He continues, from the single circumstance that a god was placed at the head of every political society, it followed that there were as many gods as nations. 2 nations, foreign to each other, and almost always engaged in battle with each other, could not obey the same leader. Thus, from national division resulted polytheism, and from this, theological and civil intolerance, which are by nature the same. The death of God allowed God to be weaponized, as with Druidry and the Holy Legend, as another origin myth for nationalism to be built upon. And nowhere is this clearer than with the national identity of the United States of America, or as some refer to it, God's own country. The synthesis of religiosity and nationhood is clearly exemplified by the inauguration speeches of its presidents. John F. Kennedy's inauguration speech concluded with, "Finally, whether you are citizens of America or of the world, ask of us the same high standards of strength and sacrifice that we shall ask of you. With good conscience, our only sure reward, and history the final judge of our deeds. Let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own." Good conscience, as the final reward, dispenses with notions of an eternal reward in an afterlife. History, as the final judge, dispenses with the judgment of God. When the Pledge of Allegiance, which is an act of nationalism in itself, recites one nation under God, it is not said under a cross or in a church, it is said to a flag. The development of the national flag is another point of interest in the development of nationalism. Flags were first used as battle standards in war to discern allies from enemies on the battlefield. Images of Roman legionnaires spring to mind. Outside the battle, flags were mostly used during the Age of Sail from the mid-16th century as maritime flags to distinguish ships at a distance. This was where the first national flags began to develop, such as the Union Jack, or the Prinsen flag, the Prince's flag, that would become the national flag of the Netherlands. It was only with the rise of nationalism that national flags began to be displayed in civilian contexts, such as on courthouses or on university campus flagpoles. Those of you present for the seminars on reading Romantic paintings might recall that the national flag is a symbolic signifier of the country itself, also known as a metonym. For example, how the crown denotes the monarch and the flag denotes the country. These symbols of nationhood aren't natural, but they are naturalized through repeated exposure. They are built out of shared experience, and it becomes the work of the purveyors of nationalism to communicate those experiences. To take a little break from the astoundingly amazing sound of my voice, I want you to get together in small groups of the people that are around you and discuss amongst you a list of ways that you think Britishness is communicated. You can choose another country if you have national ties to it. Look at the enthusiasm they have communicating with each other.
This is communicating.
Starts with politics and it's great for theatre.
But it's a symbol of that 2012 patriotism, which so many people like to talk about. England after World War II. And sometimes England, Dan Boyle was responsible for it. He talked about him with French side. He was a French side. It's entertaining.
Yeah, if it's just basically like, I don't get to you in a minute. And I realised that too. I was like, why did I do this as a left? Seminars for you to unpack. So if you've got a great comprehension of this, Listen to you all day. All day. Yeah, but you read enough that you cite the sources within you. Internalize the I did, but I'll compile one. I've got a list at the end of like books of for this yeah, I might document certain sections and highlight in terms of like where the message of the section goes. Yeah. You're all great people. No, but I was going to Okay, everyone. Who wants to tell me some ways they think Britishness is communicated? Just go for it, just shout it out. Oh, Johnny, I know you can do it.
Just like in everyday life, like walking down the street and you see a lamppost or a bollard or a sign, and it's just very, without realising, you're engaging in a sort of Britishness that's performed onto you by the space that you're existing in.
Very nice. Bollards, great. Lampposts, great. What other British iconography? Just Yana.
Use the telephone boxes, the red ones.
Red telephone boxes, brilliant.
That money, like coins and things, because it's got British people on it.
Yeah, very good. Any others?
A chicken tikka masala.
A chicken tikka masala is a great choice. I think really hints at Britain's habit of what was it? Oh yeah, colonial suppression. Bearing in mind my favourite beverage of all time and the English beverage, the humble cup of tea. Of course, not ours. Who had cup of tea on your list? There are not enough hands in the room. Come on now. Yes, that's great. What other things? What other things? Anyone got any more obscure things that they think is British?
An obsession with being proper.
Yeah, manners and politeness. We get really angry at other countries who don't queue properly because we think it's rude, which is interesting because that's actually just a British thing. There is no sort of semblance of what is rude and what is polite. Those things are socially constructed. So the fact that we go, French people are rude, which is, I believe, a common talking point. I'm not just declaring that French people are rude. I don't believe that. But yeah, it's all weird. What other wonderful, glorious things? Or are there any like horrible, awful things which really display Britishness? The monarchy, okay. Again, the monarchy, nothing inherently awful or wrong with the monarchy as it stands by itself. I disagree with that statement I said out loud, but to be fair and balanced, TM, copyright, C, whatever it is, trademark.
An undue obsession with the Commonwealth, where apparently it's like the greatest thing in the world.
How dare you suggest the Commonwealth is the greatest thing in the world? God save the King.
The British Museum.
The British Museum. We'll be getting to that one later, so 10 bonus points for you.
Our hatred of every other country on the planet.
Okay, I think we quite like America. Oh no, we don't.
Americans, French, Germans,
Yeah,
Italians.
true.
No.
I don't know if this is necessarily like English itself, but like a kind of entitlement for the English language. Like especially like people who don't speak English, there's kind of entitlement to like know English, especially when traveling.
Absolutely, absolutely. A lot of the origins I'm sort of giving you a historical overview of how nationalism plays out, so I've not really gone into theories of nationalism for a particular reason, mainly because if you're interested in nationalism, you're going to find these things anyway, and there are a lot more interesting to find firsthand, I think. But the development of language is one of the things that led to the development of and theatre makers in shows that exude high production values because of their sizable government subsidies. There are some performances that become nationalistic by the nature of their repetition, or indeed their very fabric. Holdsworth explains, this time in theatre and national identity, there are also plays or performances, whether hailed as state of the nation plays or not, that have come to be recognised as quintessentially national texts, or attain iconic status in that specific national context of their origin. The works of William Shakespeare for England, Under Milkwood for Wales, Ariel Dorfman's Death and the Maiden for Chile, or Angels in America, a gay fantasia on national themes for the state. The act of making theatre is the act of recognising, affirming, extending, imagining, and reaffirming community, or possibly communities, communities, yes, plural, that's the one. Metaphorically at first, and then literally and tangibly, theatre is the creation of a newly shared space on earth. There are those performances that are designed as nationalistic signposting for the rest of the world, as is the case with the opening ceremony of the 2012 Olympic Games. So we're going to play an extended clip. It's about 20 minutes long, which is a long time. But whilst you're watching it, I want you to list every single signifier of Britishness that you can see, because this was our major cultural export. This was one of the most watched events in the world at the time, and it was a perfect example for Britain to be like, ooh, look at how British we are.
When I went in the budget, I was about overspending.
What did people spot in there then?
Spending public money well.
I know, it's Pearly Kings and Queens, my favourite.
For the class, do you want to explain?
Does everyone know what Pearly Kings and Queens are?
No.
Somebody does. In that part of London, or South London, it's pretty much part of London now, in Purley, they used to have a competition every year, and they used to sew into suits and clothing pearls, and the winners would be the Pearly King and Queen of the year. I think somebody thought that they were Morris dancers, but they weren't. They were Pearly Kings and Queens. They used to be really famous when I was a kid. You knew they were, but now no one's ever heard of them. It's something we should bring back.
Yeah.
If you're from Purley, especially.
You're sounding very, we'll get to it later, you're sounding very nationalistic, harkening back to a previous golden
I've just seen that. Everybody's nationalistic now. We've just realised England, Britain.
That was pretty fucking cool. Well, I remember watching it live and I was like, wow, Britain. Let's say now, it's one off. What else do we see in there?
Cricket.
Cricket, brilliant. Mayday, very nice.
Cottages.
Cottages, fantastic. Rugby.
Top hats.
Was that one through?
Top hats.
Top hats, very, very British.
Should have written that.
Clowns.
So true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
true.
They had like bad weather. It's like
Clowns! I heard clowns. I was like, calling the children singing the choir clowns. It's a bit hard. What else did we see? The Beatles. Yes. Beatlemania, very, very British.
The national anthems, multiple of all the different.
Interestingly, not national anthems. And did they speak in
Well,
English?
Flower of Scotland is their national
That
anthem.
might be their national anthem, but
Right.
Danny Boy is not the national anthem of Wales,
So true.
and Did They Speak is not the national anthem of England, although there have been multiple
I did
attempts.
Jerusalem though, which should be the national anthem.
Yeah, they've made multiple attempts to make Jerusalem the national anthem, particularly when we're less royalist than we used to be. Any other bits that people know? Bit of Shakespeare. Bit of Shakespeare, great. Love a bit of Shakespeare.
The bell was right at the start.
Yeah, we love a big bell.
Suffragettes.
Suffragettes, fabulous.
Miners.
Miners, very, very, very British.
Industrialisation.
Industrialisation is, we were the front runner of industrialisation. It originated here. the red poppy, although that's more of a sort of World War I and II sort of memorandum. But I think in Britain we think that espouses Britishness. It's kind of like weird internal nationalism. I think to like not wear a poppy is a statement that one makes which might be perceived as sort of anti-British by a particular nationalistic crowd. I personally don't wear a poppy for many, many reasons, and sometimes it's very challenging.
The Windrush generation.
The Windrush generation, ironically very, very British, despite the fact that they are Jamaican from origin.
Horses.
Horses.
Yeah.
Horses, very British. I think the Shetland cart-pulling horses are very British, whereas I tend to equate horses with sort of the American West. There's one over there, at the back.
Chimney sweepers.
Chimney sweepers. Okay, so getting back to it. When we try to capture a nation in the mind's eye, Holdsworth suggests, that nation is often reduced to a constraining menu of icons that have, over time, come to stand for the nation. Like museums and theatre, sport, too, can be a large signifier of nationalist sentiment, as Michael Billing refers to in his 1995 book, Banal Nationalism. That's also a very good book if you're interested in writing about nationalism, Banal Nationalism. I think there's a couple in the library. Which refers to, in his 1995 book, which to everyday representations of a nation, which build a sense of shared national identity. The phone boxes, the lamp posters, like lawn gardens. Those are sort of the banal nationalisms. The results of the Ashes is a matter of national pride between England and Australia. Cricket matches featuring India and Pakistan can bring the two countries to a standstill. And various boycotts of the Olympic Games, such as the US and its Cold War allies boycotting the 1980 Summer Olympics in Russia, and Russia's boycotting of the 1984 Summer Olympics Games in the USA. The history of nationalism is one of transformation, not just of the nations themselves, but also of the very ideas within nationalism itself. Francis Galton was a British polymath who was profoundly influenced by Charles Darwin's The Origins of Species. His work would result in the, quotes, scientific, end quotes, field of eugenics. He described eugenics as the study of agencies under social control that may improve or impart the racial qualities of future generations, either physically or mentally. It is a practice that aims to improve genetic quality of the human population. It was with the advent of eugenics that nationalism began a violent turn to ethnic nationalism, exemplified by the Nazi slogan, Blut und Boden, blood and soil, expressing Nazi Germany's idea of a racially defined national body, the blood, united with a settlement area, soil. By blood and soil, rural and farm life forms are idealised as a counterweight to urban ones. We see this in Romantic art, but under ethnic nationalism it gained a grim weight. In the industrialised world, the countryside holds a specific interest, as does the past that rurality exemplifies. We saw this with the Brexit referendum, with requests to take back the nation's sovereignty from the European Union. Much of the claims of the far-right proponents of Brexit were jingoistic in nature, harkening back to a pure time in the British past before the European Union. As we see with the usage of mythologies, nationalistic memories requires a willful ignorance of past realities. It creates a hierarchy of countries of which always one's own nation is on the top, where different rules apply to us. It's important to know that when the sort of far-right nationalistic, ethnic nationalistic view is about harkening back to a time before, often that time before never existed in the first place, particularly the kind of like Britain was much better before the European Union. That's not like accurate by many, many metrics that we measure like GDP or personal wealth or personal health and well-being, all of those things. The 10% of the world that is consuming 80% of the world's resources cries out that we don't have enough to go around, and that we have to protect from the invasion of hungry foreigners. On the other hand, we have every right to visit their countries whenever we please, and anything we want, theirs is ours for the taking. In 2018, Jacob Rees-Mogg, the then Minister for Brexit Opportunities, announced the Festival of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, later called the Festival of Brexit, and later still Unboxed Festival. Its aim was to conjure the spirit of the 1851 Great Exhibition and the 1951 Festival of Britain. The festival was widely criticised as an attempt at establishing a new cultural backdrop to a new age of British nationalism after its exit from the European Union. The festival attempted to, as Smith suggests, discover alternative principles and concepts and a new mythology and symbolism to legitimate and ground human thought and action. We can see Smith's words acted out in the Make America Great Again movement that began as a campaign slogan for the President Donald Trump. The red hat and MAGA slogan became a symbol for a new unfolding ethnic nationalism on the basis of fears of particular groups of citizens. Holdsworth tells us that the nation comes under particular scrutiny during moments of social breakdown and urban unrest that unsettle any idea of the homogeneous nation by revealing the fractures caused by racial discord, socio-economic difference, and abuse of power. I want to close out the lecture by discussing Israel. I do this because it is a very current example of how nationalism is playing out in the world and the myths that make up the national identity of all nations. Israel is unique in the world as it is an ethno-state, in that its populace are members of the Jewish faith, with Judaism also being an ethno-religion, in that it is a faith that is passed on matrilineally, and not one that you can join. Before Israel was settled, because of the British mandate that reorganised the countries of Palestine and Transjordan that had themselves been taken during the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Jewish groups sought to settle in Kenya instead. The desire for a land state for the faith-based peoples of Judaism is called Zionism. And much like nationalism, there is nothing inherently wrong with Zionism. But just as ethnic nationalism grew out in eugenics, so too has a violent form of Zionism grown out of settler colonial practices. Robert E. Weisfleisch writes of Israel nationalism as a racist regime. The current situation is historically complex, but its displays of nationalism and nationalistic development make it an important case study if you were to choose nationalism for your essay. So by way of summary and conclusion, Smith argues that the following meanings of the term took root during the 20th century, and that's the term nationalism. 1. A process of formation or growth of nations. 2. A sentiment of consciousness, of belonging to the nation. 3. A language and symbol of the nation. 4. A social and political movement on behalf of the nation. 5. A doctrine and or ideology of the nation, both general and particular. So as we come to an end, I want to kind of talk about where nationalism is going. As we have come to a more globalised society, we are less run by governments and we're more run by corporations, particularly in political situations in which corporations, that's the one, in which corporation spending influences politics, particularly in America, where in order to run for the presidency financially, you need to gain sponsorship from companies, and that comes with a sort of quid pro quo exchange of ideas. So just as the death of God led to the rise of the nation, so too is the rise of the globalist corporation leading to, potentially, the death of nationalism.